What if the most haunting stories of World War II were never meant to be found? Buried beneath decades of silence, these disturbing truths were hidden, erased, or forbidden, not by accident, but by design. What you're about to hear isn't the history taught in schools. It's what someone wanted you to forget. Once you open this door, you can't close it. And once you see what's inside, you'll never see the war the same way again. In the icy heart of occupied Warsaw, 1942, as Nazi banners rippled over shattered buildings and the ghetto walls rose higher with each passing month, something extraordinary began to stir beneath the surface. Not a military campaign or political rebellion, but music. Faint, ghostly at first, like whispers in a church, then stronger, bolder, the kind of music the Nazis had tried to silence. In the catacombs of the city, hidden in collapsed subway tunnels and forgotten basements, a group of musicians formed what they came to call the Silent Ensemble. Jakub Kroll, once the lead conductor of the Warsaw Philharmonic, led the group. Before the war, his name had been printed in concert programs from Vienna to London. Now, his baton was a sharpened stick, his stage a damp tunnel, and his orchestra comprised musicians from every torn corner of the city. Jewish violinists smuggled out of the ghetto, Russian pianists hiding from the Gestapo, Catholic cellists branded traitors for aiding Jews. They met in secret, always moving locations. The network of tunnels under Warsaw was a world of its own, blacker than night, thick with the scent of mold and earth, and echoing with the distant booms of artillery and collapsing homes. Candles were rare, so they played in near darkness, guided by memory, instinct, and a desperate need to create something beautiful amid the horror. Their instruments were miracles in themselves. A trumpet crafted from scavenged plumbing, a cello strung with electrical wire, a clarinet whittled from salvaged wood. Most prized of all was a battered violin that had once belonged to Jakub's wife, Rachel, taken by the SS in 1941. The violin had been recovered from a Nazi storage room, cracked and scorched, but Jakub had it repaired with bits of scrap and strings made from shoelaces boiled and dried for elasticity. On Friday nights, while the city above groaned under curfews and bombings, the Silent Ensemble performed for their hidden audiences. Orphaned children smuggled in from the ghetto, wounded resistance fighters, or even fellow musicians who had not played in years. There was no applause, only silent tears and the occasional whispered prayer. What they played varied, sometimes Chopin or Beethoven, but often old folk songs from Poland, Russia, even Yiddish lullabies known only to the mothers who had long since vanished. Their signature piece became Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, a choice that struck Jakub as ironic and fitting. A piece of triumph, composed in resistance to Napoleon, played now in resistance to a new kind of tyrant. As word of the ensemble spread underground, so too did the danger. The Gestapo became aware of strange gatherings in the ruins. Informants whispered of music, forbidden music, echoing from the depths of the city. Patrols increased. Arrests followed. But the ensemble continued. Then came the spring of 1943. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising exploded like a lightning bolt across Europe. Jewish resistance fighters, armed with stolen rifles and Molotov cocktails, rose against their captors. Flames climbed into the sky. The Germans responded with tanks, flamethrowers, and indiscriminate killing. It was in this hellish cacophony that the ensemble played their final concert. Jakub and the others gathered in a tunnel beneath Swiatogierska Street. Above them, smoke drifted through cracks in the ceiling. The earth trembled with every shell. Children sat shoulder to shoulder in silence. There were no candles this time. Only the glow of distant firelight dancing on the walls. Jakub raised his baton, the sharpened stick now polished smooth from hundreds of rehearsals, and began the overture. The sound of the orchestra cut through the chaos like a prayer. Drums echoed the rhythm of artillery. Strings wept beneath the crumbling city. Every crescendo seemed to mirror the defiance above. One by one, the musicians fell silent, not from error or exhaustion, but from bullets. The tunnel had been found. German soldiers fired without warning. Instruments shattered. Bodies collapsed mid-note. Jakub continued conducting, even as he was struck. He did not fall. His hand moved until the last player, a teenage flutist named Marek, gave his final breath into the wooden mouthpiece. Only one survived, Eva Landowski, a cellist barely 20 years old, hidden beneath a pile of rubble when the shooting began. She remained there, bleeding and unmoving, for nearly 20 hours before being pulled out by a group of resistance fighters. She carried with her a scrap of sheet music soaked in blood and ash. It was the opening of the 1812 overture. Eva never played again. But she wrote. She recounted every concert, every name, every note played underground. Her memoir, Silent Symphony, a requiem for Warsaw, published in 1959, would shake the world. The original tunnel, sealed by the Soviets after the war, was reopened in 1994 and converted into a memorial chamber. A permanent audio recording, a reconstruction of the ensemble's imagined final performance, plays softly in the background. Visitors still come in silence. And sometimes, if you close your eyes, you can hear more than just the music. You can hear resistance. You can hear life refusing to surrender. In the grand chessboard of World War II, deception was often as deadly as firepower, and among the most daring feints of the entire war was one so effective, so perfectly absurd, it remained classified for nearly half a century. It was called Operation Hummingbird, a phantom fleet built not of steel, but of canvas, wire, and pure audacity. The year was 1943. The Allied High Command had set its eyes on Fortress Europe. Plans for an invasion of Nazi-occupied France were beginning to take shape, and with them came a critical realization. The Axis couldn't know when or where the hammer would fall. Winston Churchill, ever the strategist and lover of bold ideas, approved a secret initiative to mislead Hitler about the Allies' intentions. While the real preparations pointed toward Normandy, Churchill wanted the Germans to believe the assault would come from the icy waters of Norway. Thus began Operation Hummingbird. Stationed at a remote base in northern Scotland, a special unit was formed under the supervision of British Intelligence Section 5B, known informally as the Magicians. The unit included engineers, set designers from the West End, radio operators, former circus workers, and artists from the Royal College of Art. Their task was simple in concept and impossibly complex in execution: build a fake fleet. Over the course of 4 months, over 150 inflatable vessels were constructed. At a distance, they appeared to be battleships, cruisers, and even a few aircraft carriers. Up close, they were stitched fabric, inflated by portable air pumps, and anchored with floating barrels. With careful painting, weighted masts, and false smoke generators powered by oil drums and diesel burners, the illusion became nearly indistinguishable from reality in the eyes of aerial scouts. But the physical deception was only half the scheme. Parallel to the Phantom Fleet, the Allies set up a network of fake radio traffic. Operatives transmitted coded messages in a convincing pattern, mimicking real fleet chatter, engine reports, course corrections, requests for resupply. False distress signals were broadcast in Norwegian, suggesting Allied submarines operating in the fjords. A disinformation campaign leaked to neutral diplomats in Sweden helped confirm what the British wanted Berlin to believe: the Allies were preparing for a northern invasion. In the fishing village of Lodingen, a small port on the Norwegian coast, the Germans reinforced coastal batteries and bunkers. Wehrmacht officers distributed new maps and artillery assignments. SS observers arrived to supervise. Hitler himself, ever paranoid about an Allied assault on Scandinavia, ordered reinforcements sent to the region. 50,000 troops, including elite panzer divisions, were moved northward, away from France. Meanwhile, Operation Overlord, the real invasion, continued its quiet, deadly build-up in southern England. Operation Hummingbird wasn't flawless. In April 1944, a German reconnaissance plane flew too low over the Scottish coast and caught sight of one of the inflatable ships partially deflated, a large canvas flap flapping in the wind. Alarm bells rang briefly in Berlin, but a swift cover-up and cleverly staged repairs, including real Royal Navy sailors temporarily stationed near the decoys, re-established credibility. The Germans assumed it was Allied camouflage under repair, not fake ships exposed. On June 6, 1944, D-Day arrived. German commanders in Norway remained frozen in place, their eyes glued to phantom signals. For 3 days following the Normandy landings, German divisions in the north waited for a second invasion that never came. Hitler delayed the transfer of the 15th Army, which could have significantly challenged the Allied beachhead, because of his belief in a dual-pronged assault. Hummingbird had succeeded. Without firing a single shot, it had diluted the Axis defense, fractured their readiness, and bought time that would ultimately cost Germany the war. After the war, many members of the Magicians went back to their old lives, their roles in the war effort unrecognized. Their leader, Lieutenant Charles Fenwick, died in obscurity in 1958, his wartime papers sealed by the British government. It wasn't until 1992 that Operation Hummingbird was officially declassified, and the world began to understand just how close it had come to being forgotten. Today, a replica of one of the inflatable ships stands in a museum in Portsmouth. Tour guides often chuckle at the absurdity of it, but to those who know the history, it represents something more: the power of illusion, the danger of assumption, and the strange, quiet courage of a war fought not just with bullets, but with shadows. In the summer of 1943, as the Mediterranean boiled with Allied warships and the skies above Sicily filled with parachutes, a quieter operation unfolded among the wires, cables, and whispered voices of switchboard rooms. It was a war not fought with bullets or bombs, but with split-second decisions, misdirected calls, and feigned ignorance. They called them the Sirens. Officially, they were just telephone operators, local Sicilian women working in Axis-controlled villages, answering calls, connecting officers, and directing military communications. Unofficially, they were spies, couriers, and saboteurs, trained by the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, in the art of intelligence gathering. It began in May 1943, when Captain Raymond Dyer of the OSS landed in a fishing boat near the town of Castellamare del Golfo. His mission: to recruit and organize a network of local civilians who could provide real-time intelligence ahead of Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. Language, terrain, and Axis paranoia made it nearly impossible to place foreign agents directly into the towns. But the phone system? That was a different story. Sicilian switchboard rooms were manned almost entirely by women, often young, well-educated, and trusted members of their communities. No one paid them much attention. Their job was seen as mechanical, clerical, devoid of importance. But Dyer saw something else, a goldmine of intelligence. He began with one, Anna Romano, 22, fluent in English thanks to her time as a student in Malta. She had been working at the Switchboard in Trapani since 1941. After months of occupation, she had grown used to the sound of German boots and Italian barks echoing down the corridor outside her booth. But she listened. She noticed patterns. And she remembered. Anna agreed to help, not for money or ideology, but revenge. Her brother had been executed by the Blackshirts in 1942. Through Anna, more women were brought in: Julia, Francesca, Rosaria, Maria. Each had their reasons: missing fathers, bombed-out homes, or simply a hatred of the men who swaggered through their streets with rifles and arrogance. They called themselves the Sirens as a private joke, not for luring men, but for signaling danger. Their tactics were simple and brilliant. Each time a call came through from a German or Italian officer, they logged the caller, origin, and intended recipient. If troop movements were mentioned, they took note. If orders were relayed, they memorized them. But more than that, they manipulated. One of their favorite tricks was redirection. If an urgent call came through ordering reinforcements to a village, they would accidentally cross the wires and connect the officer to an empty line. When frustration peaked and the call was tried again, they would patch it through, but with a fabricated delay. Other times, they misrouted entire regiments by changing the coordinates delivered by field telephones. One such misdirection sent a convoy of tanks into the winding mountain roads near Corleone, where they became trapped for 3 days, later bombed by Allied aircraft tipped off by the same network. Their biggest coup came on July 9, 1943. A high-priority call from the German Field Command in Palermo was routed through a station managed by Francesca Greco, stationed in Agrigento. The message relayed the movement of a panzer battalion intended to intercept American forces expected to land near Licata. Francesca stalled the call by pretending there was interference on the line. She then patched it through to an OSS radio technician listening nearby in a sheep barn. Within hours, the information reached General Patton's staff. The Panzers were ambushed en route by Allied air support. Despite their successes, the danger was constant. The Gestapo had begun to suspect a leak within Sicily's communication infrastructure. Interrogations increased. One operator, Rosaria Vitali, was arrested in August 1943. She survived 6 days in custody by pretending to be mentally ill, babbling nonsense and praying aloud in Latin until the Germans dismissed her as insane and released her to her priest. To stay ahead of detection, the sirens developed a code system. Phrases like, "The lemon harvest is early," or "Uncle is visiting from Naples," would signal specific types of enemy activity. They relayed this coded language via radio broadcasts, public notices, and even graffiti. One chalk drawing of a cat in a cafe bathroom was actually a warning that German fuel convoys were en route through Caltanissetta. When Allied forces finally rolled through Sicily in late July, many of the switchboard rooms were already abandoned, their cables cut by retreating Axis forces. Most of the sirens disappeared back into civilian life, their work undocumented, unacknowledged, and erased by the bureaucratic indifference of post-war military records. Anna Romano moved to London in 1946 and lived under a different name until her death in 1989. Her diaries, discovered by her granddaughter, detailed the entire operation, naming the women, the calls, the deceptions, and the costs. Of the 12 known members of the Sirens, 5 were never seen again after 1943. Their fates remain unknown. Today, there is no official monument to the Switchboard Spies of Sicily. No medals were awarded, no parades held. But in a small church in Trapani, a plaque rests beneath a faded crucifix. It reads in Italian, "Per la voce che ingannarono la guerra, le sirene non dimenticate." For the voices that deceived war, the forgotten sirens. In March 1945, as the Pacific Theater bled toward its brutal conclusion, a B-29 superfortress named Heaven's Malice lifted off from the island of Tinian. Its mission was routine by then, a night bombing run over Tokyo, a city already scorched by firestorms. Loaded with over 6,000 pounds of incendiary bombs, the aircraft flew in formation under radio silence, cruising high above the clouds toward its target. But somewhere over the Sea of Japan, mechanical failure struck. Engine number 3 began to sputter, then failed entirely. The crew, led by Lieutenant Mark Calhoun, made a fateful decision: abort the mission and jettison the payload to lighten the aircraft before attempting to return to base. They turned north, skimming the coast of Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island, as they released the deadly cargo over what appeared to be rural farmland. None of the bombs exploded. The villagers of Asajiro, a remote hamlet nestled between the forests and snow-covered mountains, awoke to strange metallic thumps in their fields. Shaped canisters with fins and English markings lay scattered across rice paddies and icy riverbeds. Many were too afraid to approach. The war had not yet touched Asajiro directly. It had loomed like a distant nightmare, creeping closer each month, but still, the village had known no bombing, no gunfire, no soldiers. Except for Daichi Kawamura. He was 12 years old, the only child of a carpenter and a weaver, both of whom had been drafted into labor brigades and never returned. Daichi had lived with his aging grandfather, a stoic man who rarely spoke of the emperor, but always lit incense for the dead. Daichi was curious, wiry, and unafraid, traits that set him apart in a village gripped by fear. When he discovered one of the phosphorus bombs in the wooded ravine near the village edge, he did not scream or run. Instead, he stared at it for a long time. It looked like a giant silver bird, fallen and still, its metal skin dented but intact. He touched it. It was cold. That night, Daichi dreamed of fire, not destruction, but transformation. He told no one of his discovery. Over the following weeks, American bombing raids intensified. While Tokyo turned to ash, Hokkaido remained largely untouched. But in Asajiro, fear began to fester. Rumors spread that the strange devices were not bombs but poison, or perhaps cameras used by American spirits to watch the living. One villager attempted to pry open a canister. It ignited, a burst of white fire that consumed his shed and left his hands scarred forever. Daichi returned to the ravine often, watching the untriggered bomb, whispering to it as if it might answer. He began drawing it in his school notebooks, over and over, detailing every bolt, every curve, even as his teachers scolded him for ignoring patriotic lessons. Then came August. The atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The emperor's voice, ghostly and unfamiliar, crackled over the radio and surrendered. Asajiro fell into stunned silence. Some villagers wept. Others cheered in confusion. But Daichi walked to the ravine that night, sat beside the sleeping bomb, and wept, not for defeat, but for the shape of things to come. In the months following the surrender, American occupation forces arrived in Hokkaido. One officer, Major Leonard Reese, was sent to catalog unexploded ordnance in rural areas. When he reached Asajiro in November 1945, the villagers were silent and uncooperative, all except Daichi, who led him straight to the ravine. Major Reese, stunned by the boy's calm, noted that the bomb had somehow corroded internally. Its ignition mechanism had failed. It was, in his words, a dead shell in a living cradle. Reese ordered the bomb safely removed. But Daichi begged him to leave it. He said it belonged there. Reese, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of something deeper, agreed, and left the bomb as a cultural relic in his official report. It was never removed. Daichi grew into a man shaped by the silence of that ravine. He studied engineering, then philosophy. In 1964, he opened the Peace and Fire Memorial Museum in Sapporo, a quiet concrete structure with a single black corridor, leading to a room where the bomb sat under soft light, untouched. Around it, not walls of fire and fury, but sketches. Daichi's drawings from childhood, portraits of villagers, renderings of cities lost to flames. He titled the exhibit Ashes over Hokkaido. In interviews, Daichi would often say, "That bomb didn't explode, but it burned through everything I believed." For decades, students and survivors visited the museum. Veterans wept in silence. Children asked if the bomb could still wake. Daichi would only smile and say, "No, but its memory does." He died in 2007, aged 74. His ashes were scattered in the ravine where the bomb still rests, now entombed in glass, vines curling along the hillside. No longer a threat, just a reminder. And if you stand there today, in the silence of the trees, you may not hear engines or sirens, only wind and the weight of what could have been. Julien Moreau arrived at Dachau with blue paint under his fingernails. It was March 1941 when the cattle car doors were flung open and he was thrown onto the cold gravel of the camp. He had been arrested in Lyon for distributing leaflets critical of the Vichy regime, but what sealed his fate was a painting. A defiant piece titled La République en chaînes, showing Marianne, the symbol of the French Republic, bound and gagged beneath a Nazi eagle. The painting had been found during a Gestapo raid. That alone was enough. He was labeled a political prisoner, given a striped uniform with a red triangle, and assigned to Block 23, a section reserved for French dissidents. He was 34 years old. Once celebrated in Paris salons for his bold brushwork and evocative use of light, Moreau now worked hauling bricks in freezing mud and eating bread that tasted like ash. Dachau was no ordinary camp. It was the prototype, the model of Nazi cruelty, efficiency, and psychological disintegration. It reeked of ammonia, blood, and despair. The crematorium chimney never stopped smoking. Art did not belong there. It was a place where identity, name, voice, soul, was stripped away. But Julien had his eyes. Even in that place, he saw. He saw the light that fell through the barbed wire at dawn, slicing the mist like a palette knife. He saw the way snow melted unevenly on the metal roofs, making strange, skeletal shapes. He saw prisoners weeping in the latrine, their shadows longer than their bodies. He saw death, and the life still clinging to the edge of it. And he remembered how to paint. There were no canvases, no oils, No brushes. But there were scraps. Paper from discarded documents, cloth from torn uniforms, charcoal from burned wood. With ash and spit, Julian began sketching at night, hidden beneath the floorboards or behind the latrine wall. He used his fingers, nails, sometimes a stolen nail from the workshop as a stylus. His first piece was of a sparrow that perched each morning on the wire fence. He drew it over and over, as if its presence proved the world outside still existed. Others joined him. A Czech sculptor named Karel, a Polish poet called Tomasz, a German violinist who refused to speak. They formed a circle, not a resistance in the conventional sense, but an inner rebellion, an insistence on memory, beauty, humanity. Julian's drawings became secret currency. One of a weeping mother was traded for a piece of bread. A portrait of a dying Russian earned him a moment of protection from a sympathetic guard. The French underground, through bribed laborers, managed to smuggle some of the works out, folded into false soles of shoes, sewn into coat linings. In 1943, Julian painted a landscape on the inside of a Baroque ceiling, an impossible image of lavender fields under a Provençal sky. Prisoners lay on their bunks staring upward as if in prayer, imagining themselves walking among the flowers. When a capo discovered it, he beat Julian nearly to death and destroyed the ceiling. He could no longer use his hands properly after that. His fingers curled unnaturally. But he taught others to paint. With whispered instructions, he guided them, shade from the edge. Feel where the light would fall. In the spring of 1945, as the Allies approached, the SS began evacuating the camp. Chaos reigned. Julian was too weak to walk and was left behind. When American troops liberated Dachau on April 29th, they found him in the infirmary, barely alive, surrounded by torn bits of cloth and drawings stuffed in a boot. He had taped one to the wall beside his bed, a self-portrait with his eyes closed, smiling faintly. Of the hundreds of artworks he created, only 37 survived. They were found hidden in latrine walls, under bunks, inside hollowed bricks. Most were stained, burned, or warped by time. But they endured. After the war, Julian Moreau was taken to a military hospital in Switzerland. He never painted again. His hands had been too badly damaged. But he lived, quietly, modestly, in a cottage outside Geneva. He refused awards, declined interviews. When asked about his art, he simply said, "I did not paint the war. I painted what the war tried to kill." In 1961, a French historian published a book titled The Color They Couldn't Kill, showcasing the surviving drawings. The book sparked outrage and awe. Exhibitions followed in Paris, Munich, New York. Survivors visited in silence. Some recognized themselves in his work, emaciated figures, hunched over bowls, eyes like endless wells. In 1970, the drawings were permanently housed in the Memorial Museum of Human Dignity in Paris. The most famous, the sparrow on wire, hangs alone in a circular room lit by a single skylight. Schoolchildren often ask why such a simple bird matters. Because it was real. Because it lived. Julian Moreau died in 1978, buried in a nondescript grave under a pine tree, with no headstone. His request. His art, he insisted, was not about him. It was about survival, not of the body, but of the soul. In Dachau today, one of his original murals has been restored from fragments. It depicts no violence, no war, no death. Only a field of light, reaching endlessly beyond the wire. Some stories end. Others are silenced. The 5 you've just heard were never supposed to survive, but they did, in fragments, in whispers, in ashes. They're more than forgotten footnotes. They are warnings left behind by those who lived what we were never meant to know. If these stories chilled you, unsettled you, or stayed with you, then they've done what truth always does, refused to disappear. The question now is, what else is still hidden?